All right.
See if some people show up to this one. I was looking at the people who need to approve this one, or at least anything over on like the image spec side. Maybe we can get Tianan. I don't know if he was an approver or just commenter on this.
I'm not sure I even have the link to what you're looking at.
I was just looking at general image spec stuff. Yeah, Tianan was just commenting over there. So yeah, maybe John possibly. VBATs. I guess that's kind of the overall challenge of image spec. We don't have a lot of maintainers that jump on this call that are in that. I was going for trying to be productive. We were doing so good with distribution spec last week. I figured maybe we can knock out some image spec ones this week.
Yeah, last week was pretty good. I'd say let's go back to disk spec, but I think we're waiting on conformance tests. You want to give it another minute and then drop?
Yeah, if we don't get enough, we might want to do that. I'm looking through right now to kind of see what's happening on like artifact side. There's requests over there for some media types for Helm. Looking to see if there's anything else interesting over there.
Can you share that? I was just on a call about that.
Yeah, all I'm looking for is just open PRs. Although we're starting to get some people showing up, so maybe we'll have a group today. Possibly. Who's got the open container title today? Is that Vince?
No, it's just me.
Just you. How's it going today, Phil?
Oh, pretty good.
If nothing else on image spec, if we need maintainers over there, I can volunteer. I don't know what it would take to get more active people on that side.
Did you say image spec?
Yeah, we were being really productive last week on distribution spec. So I threw in like the queue today of saying, hey, do we want to look through some of the image spec PRs to try to clean some of those up? And then I started looking through who would need to approve them. And I'm just thinking we don't have a lot of maintainers that show up to this group that could go through and do that approving.
Yeah. It seems like our maintainer cleanup of 2021 didn't quite go far enough because it seems like there's still several names on there that I haven't seen involved for a couple of years. Probably more, actually.
I see John. I see Vince.
Yeah, you have two now.
So that might make enough to get an approval on some of these things if there is consistency there.
Yeah, I would just say, for the record, that there isn't really a requirement that maintainers show up to this call. So
yeah,
I think the bigger signal that I'd be looking for is our maintainers being active on the repository itself and like talking on issues and looking at pull requests, things like that.
Some of these have been sitting out for a long while without any action on them for a bit. I can do a bit of a screen share and just pick and choose what we want to look at.
Or I just wanted to point out that it's not, I don't see it as a requirement that maintainers show up to this call in particular.
No, I was thinking more along the lines of, do we have enough people to make progress on doing some cleaning? Because if we want to have at least 2 maintainers to approve any of these things, and we don't have 2, there's no point in fighting through it. But yeah, my thought process for today was just kind of go through. We got a couple. Sorry, that's artifact spec. Other tab here. Do we want to try to go through any of these and clean up some things that have been sitting for a while? Is there interest from the group?
For sure. I mean, that's fine. It's always a good use of time, but well, maybe not always a good use of time, but it's frequently a good use of time.
Kind of like encrypted media type. That one's been sitting out for a long while with a bunch of comments.
Yeah. Just like if that one falls in the same category as like the adding a Helm media type or otherwise just a place to have a table for these things, kind of got punted around a bit.
Well, in the Helm media type, and I didn't check to see who we had over here for that one. We've got that in artifact spec.
Well, that's where encrypted came in first, and that was during the time when artifacts was even launched. And that was, historically, that was one of the confusions between some folks that thought that the artifacts repo was just going to be like a moving, like not spec, but table of different media types you might encounter and where and how to deal with them. And so encrypted got opened here first, and then asked to also open on artifacts. And yeah.
So given this one's been sitting out since last December.
Longer than that, hasn't it?
Well, that's been the last activity on this one.
Yeah.
It's been sitting out for well longer than that. We proposed this thing 2019. Any action we want to take today on this one, or is this still hung up in confusion? I haven't been following this one as close.
I have feelings about it. I think, if I remember where it ended, we discovered an RFC about this, and that recommended that you do not expose the media type of something because that leaks data about the data. I think I had proposed that they just produce a structured suffix for media types. But that sounds fun, going through the IANA process. I think that's like my ideal, but I'm also not gonna reject everything. Like I don't know. I feel like with some annotations and maybe a suffix, it's pretty straightforward to express this.
And what specifically were they making the change in here? So that one was an annotation, it looks like, right? And then they had the other media types. Okay. So are we still hung up on this one? No need to drag out the whole meeting if we're not going to move forward on it. Going once, going twice. Punt for today, on to the next one. Okay. Other ones in here. Let's see. I'm going to skip the red X's just because I figure that we've got other issues that are blocking those up. Data field, this is our eternal. Hangs up for a long while. Maybe we can get some movement. The one thing I'm thinking that maybe we get some movement on this one today is that we just approved the manifest size limit proposal on distribution spec, and this kind of dovetailed into that.
You know how I feel.
I was about to say.
Yeah, I know how you feel. You know how I feel. So I'm kind of leaving it open for how do other people feel. And for anybody that hadn't seen this before, let me find I pulled up my comment just because I figured we would chat about this in a little bit. If we take a normal manifest today, it's got a bunch of layers, but some of those layers are kind of small. If I was to pull the actual blob for that layer, so I'm looking at like 9D 2F, if I'm reading that right, and I pull that specific blob, I get back, okay, here's a whole bunch of data there. And that's, if I pull that blob and I base 64 encode it, then I can just stick a field that says, here's the data
Yeah.
with that base 64 data right there. So
And didn't I just recently see that we merged something around like or there was the maximum, like a should on maximum size?
that was the distribution spec last week that we merged. So that was where this one was kind of dovetailing into it. So I figured it might be a good time to bring this one back up.
Right.
I would be much happier to merge this if ECR worked with this. That's kind of, I think, my last holdout of like, this is obviously mergeable.
Is it on us to make this depend on ECR, because ECR isn't really OCI compatible with the way they're doing stuff right now?
I don't know if I have legal obligations to block on ECR, but pragmatically, it would be nice for the ecosystem. You know?
My gut reaction is that if they start failing the compliance test, because we're checking for them being able to accept unknown fields, and they start failing that, then whether they also fail this one, I'm not, they've already failed one thing. So what's failing two things now? Other thoughts? John's being conservative. I'm being not conservative.
Hey, Brandon, as we're going through these, can you link the link?
Yeah. In the right one. I am.
I'm in support of this. I'm just trying to know who are the who's that are not.
I've gone both ways, and I've understand that that there's things that people would have to work around on it. I think I've actually like supported and been hesitant in my comments, even on this PR. It's really one of those that I wish that people wouldn't. I would hope that folks don't abuse, but nothing's stopping folks from abusing things in other ways.
So I will call out, just, I don't know how or why or who or when, but last week we were talking about the 4 megabytes limits, and we tabled it. And then when I checked my browser again, it had been merged. And I feel like that the guardrail for this?
That was my
That's the
feeling.
guardrail. Yeah. So that's largely the guardrail for this. I think the only other thing, the biggest pushback that I heard even from like Sajay, that with the engineering team on ACR, is just that I think they actually cache manifest objects differently than actual blobs. So seeing that now manifests would get cached, would be like growing in size and caching differently than the actual blobs. was kind of the frustration there. So if somebody did shove a very large object in there, then that's kind of like a technical problem to be solved. But that was kind of like a design based on something that wasn't there. It would have to be refactored.
I think that's fair. It's like it's I don't know. We're trying to do this working group thing, and progress is happening. And I don't know. It's like if we start using data, and then the new thing comes out. Now we have 3 things.
I feel like those are orthogonal.
I'm gonna. What do you mean by that?
Also, like, I get that blowing up the cache size might be annoying, but that's already an existing problem that we've now been talking about for a year. So if they haven't at least limited that in
Right.
some way,
You could just load annotations with shit.
yeah. So I feel like a year is about enough lead time. They might need to mitigate that concern, maybe. I don't know. How long do we wait?
Well, not only that, but we say this is a thing today. It doesn't mean that images are going to have this in them tomorrow. It still requires people to start implementing things.
I think the point John just made is excellent, that it's already an issue and putting stuff in annotations. So I'd been convinced that this is good. But I'm not a maintainer here.
So I heard that there were questions about ECR. I've been chatting in the background with some of the folks on the ECR team. Unfortunately, they can't make it today, but if we put this on the agenda for next week, then they should be able to come.
If we add this field to the spec, and ECR is validating directly against whatever was in the spec and not allowing arbitrary fields, would that mean that this could potentially be added to ECR and then hopefully not too distant future? And I realize you're not speaking for them, but just throwing out hypotheticals.
Yeah, I can't speak for them on this, or for the what is going to happen or what's not going to happen. The reason that I wanted to make sure that they were included was partly because you were calling them out, and partly because I don't know all of the details of ECR's implementation, but I want to make sure that if they have concerns related to embedding data in the manifest, that they're, if there are engineering concerns, then they should be brought up in this context.
I get the feeling their concerns would be less about this specifically and more about just any data any field that's not something they know about that's in the manifest, because they're doing a.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't speak for them directly, so I just, if we put this on the agenda, hopefully they'll be able to actually come next week.
Yeah, I'm trying to sort out, do we need to hold this up for that versus would their concerns be orthogonal to this, of just saying, hey, we're concerned about adding any other unknown thing, not just this one field here. We're not worried about the additional data. We're worried about arbitrary code injection or something like that.
I think those are 2 different things. So in one respect, there is a concern around unknown fields that they may have, which I don't know the details of. And second to that, if you're adding this as a known field, is there concern around the data that's actually getting embedded in there? And those are 2 different concerns. So I just want to make sure that they have, if they have concerns around it, they're able to speak to it. And I can push them to comment on this PR if they have any as well.
So on this one, any other thoughts from the potential reviewers?
I would, if it doesn't show at the bottom of this one already, then it's probably worth adding a comment. Jesus. It's probably worth adding a comment of the 4 meg limit, link to the 4 meg limit thing that's closed now, and any like was mentioned, any expectations of how long it would take for any implementation to deal with how they would handle it.
Yeah, my concern is if we don't approve this one, since we at least know our 4 meg limit and we've got a path forward on that side, is that crazy people like myself are just going to start implementing this as annotations, because the annotations will work in every registry.
Mm-hmm.
I can throw the fields in there, but they may not be the same annotation for every user. And the annotation might be project specific. So I might have a container D annotation, then have another annotation out there for another runtime.
And that's already the case. You might inline the body of the object and then inline annotation, other information about it. So
yeah, and so if I were able to get something, I don't think I probably could, but if I attempted to get something approved over there on like container D or some of my own projects, some of that stuff, you might see this data in there 3 times rather than just once. So the nice thing about having this one is that we can get that data in there once in one well-known place instead of everybody doing it individually.
Hey, just wanted to clarify, this part of the specification actually says that the data has to match exactly the blob, right? It's unlike annotations, which does not have that limitation. So do we expect implementers to actually validate that the data is matching byte by byte to the blob?
Yeah, it must be identical. If it's not identical, it's the same idea as if you pulled a blob that the digest didn't match what the blob said it was supposed to be, which is usually a client-side thing. They should be doing some validation.
All right. So currently, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I wouldn't expect, like, I would expect clients to do this correctly when they're producing the artifact. I would expect clients to must verify that it matches when they actually use this field. I don't actually expect registries to care about this or validate it because none do right now. And so this has to work even if they don't, which it does. And so you could, I think it'd be fine if you wanted to reject this early, but correctly written clients don't care if the registry validates this.
How would you write the conformance test for this? Like if we send a bad payload and the registry accepts it, does it pass it?
I would think yes, but I'm interested in other people's thoughts.
you're saying that you would allow for a registry to have a blob and a data field that don't match, just so that they're not having to do all the compute, to check it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I think this is so easy to merge is that we don't need
Well, easy to merge, but what's right for the implementation.
Sure. I don't think it would be a problem if a registry rejected this early. But also, I don't think it's a problem if registries just completely ignore this field. There are a lot of things registries currently don't validate, and keeping registries dumber is ideal for me. So, I wouldn't advocate for a conformance test that registries do this validation. I don't know that we have a conformance test for the registries validate the size field either. Most registries didn't last time I checked.
The manifest does fail if the link files don't exist, right? If the digest doesn't exist, so we do go back and validate the storage. So I think my question is, should we how would we write a conformance test for this field if we did have this field in the schema? And that's kind of what I'm trying to understand here. In general, I think I do support this. I just want to make sure we articulate that we can either reject, or if it is non-validated, then we have to, in the security part, write that this is up to the client to validate, and they may or may not trust this field. Is up to them.
And keep in mind, everything we're doing here is on image specs, so we're not saying the registries have like an API response to this one. It's just an extra field that could be there, and so potentially they could validate. But I kind of tend to agree with John that I wouldn't require them to validate. I also want to point out, because you're saying if we're requiring that the blob exists on the registry already, and we put this one up, I think I'm looking at the right one here. Previously, it said that registries don't necessarily have to validate that. They can, but they don't have to. And it's typically a best practice that a client does send the blob, but we have this on in the system now that says that that's not a hard requirement.
Okay, so the conformance test can just actually ignore it, and we have to say that it is up to the client to validate it, and the registry does not protect against this mismatch.
Registry doesn't. Where I did want to comment there was that you've already pulled the manifest, you've already got the data field, you can validate it as a client, and then you can ignore it as a client if it doesn't match the digest and just fall back to your normal behavior. So I don't see, beyond a couple of extra bytes downloaded over the network and a little bit of extra client-side validation, I don't see a big negative. You're not throwing extra round trips and stuff like that into the connection. You're just potentially removing them.
I understand, but again, all I'm trying to say is that we, in the conformance test, say that we do not validate this as it matching the digest on the registry. This is for distribution, not for image spec. Because for image spec, we actually introduced the media type back because distribution had a bug. So they're not totally disconnected. Just want to make sure that we clearly specify that there is no guarantee that these may match, but good clients are expected to validate it on the client. That keeps the messaging clear also.
Yeah, in the PR, it says that the content should be verified against the digest and size fields by content consumers, which is, I think, how I tried to put the responsibility on clients.
Sounds good.
All right, next steps on this one.
I'm happy to wait until next week if some ECR folks can show up, and if they're happy with it, then maybe we rattle some things until a maintainer shows up and clicks a button.
Yeah, and ideally, I mean, if the ECR folks would take a look at this, then before then, I could just get resolved in comments. Samuel, do you think that we could forward this one along for review, and even if it needs like a concise summary?
Yeah, I'm going to push on them to do that. If you've got a concise summary that you want me to send along with it, I'm happy to do that.
John, do the thing.
The PR is
I know.
plus 29, minus 9. There's a lot of context to summarize, though. Yeah, I can write that.
All right. Boy, I'm not as good at this as Josh is. Sorry, folks.
You're doing great.
So other things in here. Clarify links in the image spec. We don't have Vanessa for this one. What was changed in this? This one I have not been following as much. Anyone have strong opinions over here?
I think it just needed follow up.
I'm not ignoring you. I'm just getting HackMD to update so I can drop this link out there. So nothing on this one for today. Table it. Going once, going twice.
Sometimes with these, it's probably just as good to like bump the comments if we looked at it and it needs follow up. Or, we try to discuss it.
Can you drop that note in there, Vince?
Look at that delegation happening.
If I type, everybody has to listen to it over a sensitive microphone. All right, let's see. So that's the link one. This one, I think there was a good question on this because what we were looking at was the Go Embed package, which was how long do we wait until we start using new Go features?
I mean, I think people do actually import from our code. I don't know if it would be rippling of a side effect to commit something that, if and when we eventually tag a new release that requires something like a newer version of Golang, even I think this one goes to 115. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we're bumping to a version of Go that didn't even support anymore. So from that perspective, I'm not horribly concerned about it. I just don't know if we want to have a policy ourselves that says, hey, we're going to at least support one or two versions back before even what Golang supports. That gives us some flexibility of saying, okay, we waited 6 months, now it's time to go. Other opinions? Nobody wants to weigh in on a.
Brian Goff says it'd be nice to have some kind of policy about it, but
Josh, I still say you're better at this than I am.
which issue was that you're just looking at?
This was schema for Go Embed. So I'll copy this. I can
84.
drop this one over there. Yeah, that one. Okay. Our escape field, I haven't even looked at this one. Didn't even know this existed on their side.
Yeah, we have a container DPR which has more discussion. I don't know if it'd help or make it more confusing, but I can post the link in the chat.
So what actually changed in this? 11 lines doesn't feel like it's all that much.
So it's something that Docker's image config supports for Windows. And so Justin recently opened a PR in Containerd. I posted the link in the chat. And the discussion there was, well, if this is going to be used long term, it should really be in the OCI image config object.
And what do the Containerd folks feel about that one?
Yeah, I guess the general consensus was simply that it's yeah, Brian's it's hacky, but if it has to be supported, it should be not just something held off on the side, but should be if it has to be there for Windows images, then it needs to be in the spec.
Looks like everybody is saying it should be over in OCI, not over in Containerd. And so maybe we should be talking about it. And I admit I have not been looking at this one at all, so it's new to me as well. And I don't do a whole lot with Windows images, so I don't have a lot of bias on this one.
I think one thing in this case is that Docker is building images with this in it already and has for years.
Is it something that has to be built in, or could it be something that we didn't have to do it this way and we're just kind of suffering through it because that's the way it got coded at one point?
I think if you go back to the Containerd link PR and look for kevpar, well, there's a comment there, but he had a somewhat longish comment, I feel like, that kind of explained why it's here.
Am I looking at the right one here? Wall of text.
Yeah, I think, yeah, this at least has some of the framing.
One part of me definitely would like to see it over here just because I use the OCI fields to parse stuff when I pull it down. And so being able to fully parse everything and be able to decode it and re-encode it without breaking stuff is nice. I hear a lot of silence, which I think means that there's no other Windows developers.
Yeah, it's kind of tough because, most of us are not thinking about these issues. And as Brian said, this is like a solution that was created years ago for, something that's very Windows specific and doesn't affect most people working on, well, anyone who's not focused on Windows. So I think the issue here is more a matter of, if there have to be images that use this until a better solution is found, like you just said, it'd be at least reasonable to have the image spec config object not lose that information when decoding and encoding Windows images.
It always makes you wonder if it will be worth saying we're accepting this for historical reasons, not because we're recommending anybody use it. Unless we look at this and say, okay, we are recommending it.
I have literally no idea.
Stump the entire team at once.
That's unfortunately how I felt about a few of the Windows things that get asked or brought up.
Yeah, I mean, my
Not that
knee-jerk
it's
reaction.
overly complicated. I just don't have any basis of.
Yeah, my knee-jerk reaction is I want to get this included just so I can parse them, but I don't necessarily want to recommend it until I understand it better. And so if OCI has a category for that of saying, you know, maybe not deprecated, but just unadvised to use this in production anywhere kind of stuff, I don't know how we'd want to phrase that. All right, enough excitement on this one for a day. Probably throw a bump in there to consider if we want to rephrase some of the terms around the field.
I'd love to hear from someone who's really passionate about this pull request.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's worth asking Justin or Kev to provide more of that, or you know, we can invite them here in a future week.
I kind of feel like we have stuff in here in OCI that is Windows specific in the past, like the external layers, foreign layer stuff that we regretted after doing, or at least some people regret after doing. But once it got added, people could use it for all kinds of stuff going forward. And so it's not easy to get back out again. This kind of feels like we're pulling something in. We're saying, okay, someone's already doing it, so let's document it. But it might make sense to say, anybody thinking about using this going forward, please don't. That might be a clean way of saying it. That way we're at least capturing the documentation on the past without giving advice for the future and giving us another thing we regret later on. Unless Justin convinces me otherwise and says this is an awesome feature that everybody should want to use in all their images.
Yeah, I don't think that would happen, but
You never know.
Unfortunately, that's what happened with the URL field. It was everybody got excited to use it, and it was for some Windowsism or foreign layers.
Yeah, and then we said, well, we're not going to use it over there anymore, but we can't take it out anymore because it got used by who knows who. We didn't restrict it.
I was more going to say, I don't think Kev or Justin would be like, yeah, this is amazing. I think they admit this is not an optimal solution in the containerd issue.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, I like the general spirit of getting this stuff documented in some way. How we document it, I think is the only question. All right, last one for the day is, as long as I'm only going through the green check marks, unless somebody has something they want to throw up for the meeting group here, because I've been hogging it all for just issue spec. But yeah, adding C and Rust libraries. Bats, what are you doing to us? Why are you throwing this in there?
Yeah, and then I think the guy actually said that there's a couple of other libraries that are more useful. So, this is where things can become a long tail, but I honestly forgot that we had an implementations page. And it is kind of nice to at least, like if people are using it or calling out to some of these pieces, like who actually uses this thing? Or, like how can I put my hands on it rather than reading a very exciting spec. So
Actually, I've been tempted
probably
to throw some.
I probably just need to update this and add the couple that he put on there.
I've been tempted to throw some PRs out on that page itself. I was afraid this was a whole lot worse. If we're just documenting links to other projects, cool,
No.
let's approve it.
Yeah, implementation is just, maybe I should say pointing to C in REST libraries.
Yeah, no, I was worried that you're actually adding a C implementation to our spec repo, and I was getting a little concerned.
No, sir.
I mean, yeah, that I was confused by the name, but a lot of projects use the term adopters, but I guess because it's a spec, implementations does make sense.
Cool. I like adding documentation on who's using things. That's cool to me. I have no say in this matter, but it's cool to me.
I agree. This is cool.
All right. Any other thoughts? Any other things people want to hit? Open issues? I didn't really go into artifacts because I don't know if we have anybody that does artifacts. This one came in just the other day. It looked good enough. The Helm chart one. I can have a lot of tabs clean up when I'm done with this page. But they were just changing a couple of media types to match what Helm is already doing today. And so they're just adjusting some of the fields. I'll drop this link over here as well.
Those are correct. Those are correct if someone has a green button.
Yeah, I went back and double checked them saying, hey, we've done this in the Helm project already. We've already got stuff in our current repo. So it looked good to me. And that is all I've got. Any other request?
Is Sam still here? Yes. Do we want to chat about this maintainers, like kicking out maintainers thing? Is that something that's within TOB's abilities today, or is that something we need to write down?
I believe it's something we'd have to amend the charter to do.
Okay. Well, perhaps we can do a TOB meeting and talk about what we want to do with that.
Yeah, we can get a TOB meeting scheduled. I don't want to frame this in terms of kicking people out, but if we have things that we think are expectations we want to set for maintainer activity, then and we have a proposal for that, then it'd be worth talking through that.
Okay, that's all.
Do you need other maintainers for the image spec? And if so, is there a process to get added to that list? I'm looking through the governance right now, realizing I haven't looked in a while.
Yeah, so the governance of the OCI leaves that up to individual projects. So individual specs can decide their own process for adding maintainers. So it would generally be the existing image spec maintainers vote to add new people. and it's not within the TOB's purview to add maintainers.
So it might be as hard or just as hard to add a new maintainer as it is to clean out inactive maintainers.
I mean, if you look back, well, if you look through the closed PRs, you'll see April, May last year, there were some votes using, the image spec does have, you know, a add maintainer, what a 2/3 majority rule. So that was used last year to add a few. And then Chris Anichuk, I think we sort of invoked some privilege and removed 1 or 2, maybe, after getting 0 response.
Well, like I say, if you need additional maintainers, I'll volunteer as tribute.
I think it'd be a fantastic maintainer. So I don't have to say there, but +1.
Cool. Well, with 5 minutes left, last call. Otherwise, give people back 5 minutes so they can take a break before the next meeting.
I know.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have a great weekend.